So now we're on to Congress. And instead of using Steve Miller's, we're using Mr. Lippman's PowerPoints. So the basics. Three-way battle for power with judiciary and executive. Just the way they wanted it in the Constitution. They wanted checks and balances, separation of powers. Until the 17th Amendment, there was direct election of senators. Until the 17th Amendment, there wasn't direct election of senators. They were basically elected by state legislatures. There are two houses in one branch. That's called bicameralism. The census, it greatly affects the House of Representatives because it determines apportionment, which means it determines how many representatives each state gets. And then, based on population, there has to be redistricting in states. The census happens every 10 years, and it causes changes in district boundaries as a result. Because of Westbury versus Saunders, that court case, there is an attempt to create as close as possible an equal number of citizens in each district. All power stems from Article 1, Section 8. There are many powers listed in Article 1, Section 8. There are 435 members in the House, 100 members in the Senate. In 2003, Texas Democrats left the state in order to hold off the necessary quorum needed by Republicans to do what? Pass a Republican-sponsored redistricting bill. This was an incredibly controversial redistricting bill because it had already been redistricted. But when the Republicans got a majority in Texas, they decided to do another redistricting, which, while it was legal because there wasn't a rule that says they couldn't do it, it was something that had not been done in the past. So what is gerrymandering? If you look, the original gerrymander cartoon, that weird vulture thing is one voting district. And in 2010, you can see something kind of like that, the Illinois 17th District. The idea behind gerrymandering is really quite simple. You draw districts to weaken your opponents and to strengthen the people that you like. And so you increase the number of representatives of your party. A bill or proposed law cannot become law without the consent of what entity? Both the House and Senate. So that's another check on the power of Congress. Congress is supposed to be the most powerful branch in the United States government. However, it checks itself because it's split into two. Bicameralism. More of the basics. House members have to be 25 years of age or older. Senate members have to be 30 years of age or older. All members should live in their districts if they expect to get elected, but they don't have to live in their districts. The impeachment process starts in the House. All revenue bills have to start in the House. The Speaker of the House is third in line to become president. If the president passes away and the vice president pass away, then it goes to Speaker of the House. If the Speaker of the House is with them and passes away as well, then the Senate President Pro Tem becomes president. If the Senate President Pro Tem was hanging out with them and they all passed away in a gas main explosion or something, then it would go into the cabinet. The Vice President only votes in case of a tie, but the Vice President is technically the President of the Senate. So what are the powers of Congress? The powers of Congress found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution include the powers to lay and collect taxes and duties, borrow money, regulate commerce with foreign nations and among the states, establish rules for naturalization, which is the process of becoming a citizen, and also rules for bankruptcy, coin money, set its value, fix the standards of weights and measures. So what exactly does a pound weigh? A pound. Punish counterfeiting, establish a post office and post roads, issue patents and copyrights, define and punish piracies, felonies on the high seas, and crimes against the law of nations, create courts inferior to or below the U.S. Supreme Court declare war, raise and support an army and a navy, and make rules for their governance, provide for a militia, reserving to the states the right to appoint militia officers and to train militias under congressional rules, exercise legislative powers over the seat of government, which is the District of Columbia, and over places purchased to be federal facilities, forts, arsenals, dockyards, and other needful buildings. Make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested by this Constitution in the government of the United States. This necessary and proper or elastic clause has been interpreted expansively by the Supreme Court. So types of committees, types of congressional committees. You have standing committees. Those are permanent committees. Joint committees. Those are committees that have members from both the House and the Senate. Conference committee is a special type of joint committee that is about bill reconciliation. In other words, when a bill is passed in the House and a bill is passed in the Senate, it's not the same. It goes to conference committee, which is a joint committee that figures out how to make a bill that has some sort of compromise between the Senate version and the House version, and then it goes back to a floor vote in both the House and Senate, and they vote up or down on the measure. Select or special committees. These are temporary committees. A lot of investigatory committees are select or special committees. Bills can be forced out of a House committee by what? A discharge petition. So that's a way to get around the power of the Speaker of the House and the House Rules Committee. It's a way for regular members of the House of Representatives to get a chance to try to vote on a bill. Types of committees continued. Oversight committees. The job of oversight committees is to oversee the executive agencies that are involved in regulation to make sure that they are carrying out the intent of the law that created them. And congressional review allows Congress to nullify an agency regulation within 60 days of its becoming effective. One of the things that we need to understand is that Congress routinely passes laws that give the bureaucracy, agencies in the bureaucracy, some leeway in how to interpret what they're supposed to do according to the law, but Congress can come back and say, oh no, that's not what we meant. How are the House of Representatives and the Senate organized? And here you see in the House of Representatives at the top you have the Speaker, and then you have the majority and minority leaders, the minority and minority whips, and the Republican Conference or Democratic Caucus, and then various committees, steering committees for both parties. Republicans have something called the Policy Committee. Both have a Congressional Campaign Committee. Outside of the party system of majority leader, minority leader, you have a committee system and a committee on rules. In the Senate, you have the Vice President or President pro tem, and you have the committee system, and then on either side, you have something very similar to what you have in the House when it comes to the majority leader, the minority leader. So the House Rules Committee is key, and members are selected by the Speaker. They place a rule on a bill. In other words, they schedule when it gets considered. Majority and minority leaders pick committee appointments except for the Rules Committee. And the committee chair is now limited to 6 years in the House, but there is no limit in the Senate. So they try to create a situation where more people get to have leadership positions in committees in the House of Representatives than used to be the case. So what were the committees of the 111th Congress? And here you see the list in the House: Agriculture, Appropriations, Armed Services, Budget, Education and Labor, Energy and Commerce, Financial Services, Foreign Affairs, Homeland Security, House Administration, the Judiciary Committee, and it's kind of broken down into some aspects: Natural Resources, Oversight and Government Reform, Rules, Science and Technology, Small Business Standards, Official Conduct, Transportation and Infrastructure, Veterans Affairs, Ways and Means, and a large number of standing committees for the Senate, but not quite as many. Why are there fewer standing committees for the Senate? Because there are fewer members in the Senate. They are less specialized than the House members are. And then you have select, special, and other committees. You have the Senate Select Ethics Committee. You have the House Permanent Select Intelligence Committee. House Select Committee on Energy Independence and Global Warming. Joint Committees on Economics, Taxation, the Library of Congress, Printing. So how does a bill become a law? Let's pretend it's a revenue bill. A revenue bill always has to start in the House. Bills that aren't about revenue don't have to start. Revenue appropriations don't have to start in the House. They can start in the Senate. But we'll deal with the ones that involve money in an obvious way. It will start in the House. It will be introduced in the House. It will be referred to the House Rules Committee. Well, it'll be referred to the House committee that it should be involved in, referred to subcommittees, reported by full committee, goes to the Committee on Rules. There's full House debate and votes on passage. And anywhere you see a stop sign, that's a place where the bill could die. The bill will then be considered in the Senate. It'll be referred to Senate committees, referred to subcommittees. It'll be reported by the full committee. The full Senate debates and votes on passage. And by the time it gets through all of these procedures in the Senate, it may not look like the one that was passed over in the House. And then that means it would go to conference committee. And that's another point where it could stop. Then you get to House and Senate approval, another point where you could stop. And then it gets transmitted to the president, who could sign it where it becomes law, can veto it, which means it's not a law unless it's overridden by 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate. Or if the president doesn't sign it, it becomes law after 10 days, assuming Congress is in session. If Congress has adjourned, is no longer in session, and the president hasn't signed it after 10 days, then it is a pocket veto and it is not a law. So, job of the elected. What are congresspersons, what do they tend to do? They try to create jobs and bring in money for their district. That's called pork. Log rolling. They vote in favor of other Congress members who will then exchange the favor and vote for the things they're trying to get passed. Because sometimes there are issues that a representative is not particularly worried about, or a senator is not particularly worried about, because it doesn't really apply to their state too much. Maybe they are a desert state and the issue has to do with corn subsidies. They don't really have much of a concern about corn subsidies. But if they get a chance to get a favor from someone, a representative from Missouri, they'll vote in favor of the corn subsidy so they can have that favor from the Missouri representative, so they'll vote for something that matters to that representative from a desert state. And that is called log rolling. Serving two distinct groups. They serve party leaders, colleagues, and lobbyists, basically the institution, political institution, and then they serve constituents, the voters back home. They can serve as a trustee, where they vote based on their best judgment of what's good for their constituents, or they can vote as a delegate, in which they vote the way constituents want. Most representatives and senators vote as politicos, which they combine the two. In issues where their constituents have strong feelings, they tend to vote the way the constituents want. In areas where their constituency doesn't really have a strong opinion, even if they might have an opinion, it's not an intense, strongly held opinion, then they'll vote based on their best judgment. Congressional support agencies. You have the Congressional Budget Office, which basically checks the numbers that they are given from the OMB. So when the Office of Management and Budget says this program is going to cost X amount, the Congressional Budget Office is going to run its own study, come up with its own numbers. Basically, Congress did this so that they wouldn't have to rely completely on information that was given to them by the President and the executive branch. The Congressional Research Service helps do research that helps them figure out what to legislate on. General Accountability Office. More than 9,000 bills are introduced each year, but less than 10% of them will become a law. Remember all those stop points in how a bill becomes a law? That's why. In the Senate, A hold allows a senator to be notified before action is taken on a bill. A filibuster is unlimited debate, so nothing else can be taken up. It takes 60 members of the Senate to vote for a cloture rule, which when they invoke cloture rule, it can stop a filibuster. So it's hard to do. 60 out of 100 is a supermajority. It's difficult to reach that, especially nowadays when we usually have situations where the party that has a majority in the Senate usually has anywhere from 51 to 55 votes. So it's hard to get to 60. The Senate must approve all high-level executive appointments by a majority vote. They must approve all federal judges by a majority vote, must approve all foreign treaties by a two-thirds vote, and senatorial courtesy is when a senator gets to select the judge to fill a seat in his or her state when a vacancy occurs, as in a district judge, if the president goes along with it. So they basically tell the president, hey, we don't like this guy, and then the president usually backs off, assuming the senator's from the same party as the president. All right, declaring war. Only Congress can declare war. They passed the War Powers Act to limit the president's power to commit forces in foreign lands without congressional approval. It's still up in the air about the constitutionality of the War Powers Act. Congress appropriates all funds and thus can also stop armed forces on foreign soil by simply not approving funds. But that's not easy to do. Makes you look bad politically when you say you won't support the troops. So the War Powers Act of 1973 has been considered by many to be what? Both C and D, largely ineffective and unconstitutional. The president's power over a bill. The president can sign it, veto it, do nothing, and after 10 days it becomes a law if Congress is still in session, or can do a pocket veto, do nothing, and Congress adjourns before 10 days elapse, and it will become a veto. The Tenure of Office Act was passed to do what? Prevent President Andrew Johnson from removing Lincoln's cabinet appointees.